we wanted to take a closer look at an event that happened last week that several of our Future and Group folks were taking part in, and that is the annual Amazon Web Services Security Conference, also known as AWS Reinforce. For 2025, AWS introduced some new key security upgrades, including expanded identity tools, enhanced code and threat detection, along with their Inspector and GuardDuty tools, as well as easier deployment through improved web application firewall and just plain old firewall features. New CISO Amy Herzog, no relation to the deep-voiced guy, emphasized in identity security as being a key component, while AWS in general reinforced its focus on automation, secure deployment, and ecosystem collaboration. Now, Al, you and I weren't there because, well, we were focused on some other things, but there's an excellent write-up on the Future and Group website that we wanted to highlight. What were some of your big takeaways from Reinforce based on the excellent writing from Fernando and Krista and Mitch?
Well, I think it's just a continuing sharpening of the pencil, keeping things very focused on security at AWS. AWS has always believed security was very important, even though they give you plenty of tools to remove security from yourself as a customer. That's an interesting part of that shared responsibility model. I've always been a fan of AWS Inspector. When I was teaching the AWS training courses, it was one of the things I always demoed was, let's just scan over everything you got and see what vulnerabilities are here. And let's, better yet, build that into the automation system that you're going to use to build out your infrastructure. Put it in your CI/CD pipeline. I like that GuardDuty is getting some more capabilities. GuardDuty is the real-time analytics. And it was one of the first places that I saw observing what's going on with DNS as being used as a way of identifying threats that are within your organization. Of course, that's a pretty well-known technique these days to identify whether data is being exfiltrated by DNS or whether requests are being sent back to command and control through DNS. But GuardDuty is getting more awareness of other parts of infrastructure, being able to see in real time things like the Kubernetes EKS service logs and getting more insight about what's supposed to be happening and what's actually looks like threats going on. So it's nice to see continuing improvements in there. There's some challenges around configuring web application firewall and CloudFront and the network firewall and getting things consistent and happy together. And the more of that can be automated, and that's one of the things we see in here, is threat feeds being sent in to the network firewall, not just web application firewall. We also saw in this some improvements to AWS Shield, which is AWS's DDoS protection, or another string of the DDoS protection components that AWS has. I think all good, great improvements to see, continuing work in there. Seems to be really positive stuff. Tom, you're much more deeply in the weeds of the networking security elements here. What did you see in this?
I saw Amazon's attempt to try to show their users that they do care about security, because the lack of security, or in some cases, the lack of tools to prevent me from shooting myself in the foot, could potentially drive customers off of the platform. And we've seen this time and time again. How many times have we talked about a story here on the rundown, or have you seen something published online of misconfigured permissions on an S3 bucket, or some kind of weird access policy that allowed people to jump into the squishy center of your VPC, and then the next thing you know, they own everything? These are not hard problems to solve. And I know they're not hard problems to solve because we solved them. We solved them years ago by creating robust perimeter security, by allowing things like VPNs. But the key is that we hardened the perimeter before we started building the squishy center. And that is an opposite relation that you have in cloud platforms like AWS. You want to build the squishy center first because that's where the value is. And we'll worry about fixing it later. We'll protect it later, which is the lie that we all tell ourselves. We'll do the hard stuff later as long as it just works. And then that becomes, well, I don't want to break it, because if I break it, then someone's going to yell at me, and too much of our system is reliant on this. So we just won't worry about it. And then guess what? You're on the news, and you don't really want to be on the news for stuff like this. I think that Amazon realizes that the majority of their customers are not security gurus. And so they need to make this as simple as clicking a button. So making easy to deploy web application firewalls is a great start. I can remember seeing some of the very first web application firewalls. Like, I want to say it was back when I was a delegate at Tech Field Day and we saw Mykonos right after they got bought by Juniper. I was like, man, that's a really cool thing. Really powerful, really complicated. We've distilled the essence of what a web application firewall can do down now so that it's a lot easier to deploy. But you've got to bridge that gap. And the gap is, if they're so easy to deploy, why aren't you deploying them on your systems? And I think that that is a challenge that Amazon is going to continue to have. They can do everything for you. They can make it easy to deploy. They can make the buttons green and red and make you click on them. But you have to be the one to do it. Just like you have to be the one to secure your S3 buckets, to do all of the things. And if you don't do those things, well, Amazon's not going to take the blame for you because all the tools are there. But all it takes is going to a provider like I don't know, a Microsoft or a Google, where all of those things are automatically done for you. And now it's like, well, guess what? I don't really care. Go for it. We'll just move all of our secure workloads over here, and we'll let the stuff we don't really care about run in AWS because it's kind of cheap. And I like this Route 53 tool. So I don't know. Maybe at the end of the day, Amazon will keep a few more customers, but with a new CISO in the house, they have to be iterative on this. They have to be ready to create user friction to provide better security. And look, I know and you know that creating friction with users is the fastest way to get security disabled. But in this particular case, lack of friction is going to cause people to slide right into those news articles where everything keeps getting owned and shared and stolen, and nobody wants that. And if you get embarrassed enough, you'll move off of that platform. I mean, Al, do you think that people are willing to pay a little more to be a little more secure?
I think smart people are definitely prepared to pay a little more, but I think you've really hit the nail on the head when you talked about it being essentially lazy. You got to make your product work for the people who are lazy, or the other way to look at it, the people who are busy doing something else. And so I think this is where AWS is a little bit being bitten by the way they've structured the organization. Their two pizza teams builds a service and has freedom and autonomy to do their own thing. Doesn't make it easy to unify everything. Doesn't make it easy to bring all of the pieces of that security solution together. And you've got to make it easy. You've got to make the security thing easy. So I'm not sure that I agree about adding more friction. I think you're actually reducing friction when you make it easy to build the security in. But if you force people to have a hard time building in the security, yeah, that's when you're going to fail. You've got to make building security on top of whatever your application is simple, seamless, easy to deploy, without just allowing any.
Well, let's hope for the best, because if it doesn't pan out, Amy Herzog may be out, and we may be forced to listen to keynotes from Werner Herzog, which honestly would be really cool to hear, but really soul crushing, because anything that man says is just dour.